As we listen to this dialogue between Jesus and his disciples, one thing that I was reflecting upon, or didn't reflect upon much, but I just looked at it and said, is it interesting that the first question he asked was, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And then the second question was, but who do you say that I am? To me, two very different questions. Like I said, didn't reflect on it, just thought I would point that out to you. You can reflect on it and let me know what you think Jesus was doing through all of that. It has nothing to do with my homily today. So, just thought it was interesting. Jesus rarely does things without purpose, so maybe we can think about that. But today, for my reflection for the homily, very much is the question that he does ask to the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter giving that answer of great conviction, great faith, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus acknowledges that Peter is correct and that he received that not on his own, but through revelation from the Father. And as I was pondering that, I thought, well, it is possible that there was this instantaneous divine revelation that was given to Peter in that moment. But I'm going to put forth the possibility that maybe it wasn't an instantaneous divine revelation, but it was a revelation from the Father that Peter came to over time. And it was in that moment that it all came together for him. Also definitely guided by the Father, guided by the Spirit. It was something that gradually happened. Because for Peter, in my opinion, to say something of such conviction would mean that he would have to know Jesus, to be able to say it so boldly. And to know him meant that took some time. And how did he get to know him? And I think that's the key there, is how did he get to know Jesus? This question wasn't asked, the day after Jesus called his disciples. This was after some time of him journeying with them. And just as Peter had to get to know Jesus to be able to make such a bold claim, maybe the same is true for each of us. Do we just make that statement because Peter did? Or should we be making that statement with that boldness, with that conviction, because we have come to know Jesus just as Peter did? And I put forth some possibilities as to how Jesus was known by Peter. How did Peter get to know Jesus? Well, first and underlying any of the things that I'm going to be saying is a sense of prayer. Prayer is going to be the filter that we go through any of these things. Because the first thing that I think helped Peter to get to know Jesus is he listened to Jesus. He heard what he said. And no doubt Peter, having awareness of the Hebrew scriptures, would have known what the prophets had said. And when he was listening to Jesus, he'd go, hang on here. That's sounding like this man is fulfilling what the prophets said. Sounds like this guy is what we've been waiting for. And so he would listen to him, and hear his words, which I think is so important for us too. We need to listen to Jesus. And that primarily happens in prayer, but make sure that as part of our prayer, we stop talking. We're very good at talking. Typically at prayer, let God know exactly what he needs to do for us. But do we take the time to listen? That's why whenever you have an opportunity for adoration, to spend some time in adoration, just to sit there and allow Jesus to speak to you. We need to listen. Although, as a society, we're not very good at listening. We're always noise, noise, noise. Now, if I were to say for the next 3 minutes, we're just going to be in silence, some of you would look forward to that, to say, okay, for the next 3 minutes, Father won't be talking. But others would say, 3 minutes? Oh, that's not too bad. But after about a minute, minute and a half, you're going, ooh, this is taking too long. Because we're not used to that silence. But that's where God speaks. That's where Jesus speaks to us. So we need to do like Peter and listen. That's how we get to know Jesus. And as well, we can listen by hearing the words in Scripture and that, but we need to listen and ponder those words. We need to listen and hear how God's speaking to our heart. Second way I think that Peter got to know Jesus is by observing him. He watched what he did. He watched how he reached out to people. He watched how he healed people. He watched all those things, the way that he interacted and connected with people and said, this guy is connecting and revealing a different kind of relationship than other rabbis had, that other teachers had. He was engaging the people, sharing a love that really hadn't been experienced before. Love of Jesus, the love of the Father through Jesus. So he was observing him. And I think maybe we too need to observe Jesus. And maybe in this way I'm going to challenge us to look in a different way. I think most of us have somebody that we've encountered or know that maybe is that Jesus-like person. There's just something about them that they just seem to be like Jesus. Maybe it's your spouse. Looking around, some of you are saying, no, not my spouse, but okay. Or maybe it's a friend, maybe it's your parents, your grandparents, maybe it's your child, that there's just something about them that there's so many moments that you really get a sense of Jesus working through them. Maybe it's somebody that helps out with St. Vincent de Paul. Maybe it's, some saint that you are aware of, you can read their story again. Or maybe there's somebody in the world, on the world stage that anytime you see what they're doing, you go, yes, that person is like Jesus. And to really look at that person and say, okay, what is it about them? And what can I do to be like that? So observe this person to see a Jesus-like person. That's how we get to know him better too. And another thing I think that Peter did often, Peter doesn't seem to be a shy kind of guy. He just sort of blurts things out sometimes. Sometimes he does very good, like today. Other times not so good. So I have the image of him he was one that was not afraid to question. Question Jesus, to say, okay, help me understand who you are. And maybe that's what we need to do in our journey too. Questioning, it's not wrong to question. Wrong is when we have a question and we don't seek the answer. Maybe we can offer that question and, in prayer, as we're listening, Jesus will reveal that to us. Maybe we need to question certain things that will help us know Jesus better by, there's different podcasts, different social media things, internet, different books you can read perhaps. Ask those questions and seek the answers. That's how we get to know Jesus better. And the last way that I'm going to suggest that Peter got to know Jesus and to know about Jesus more is he tried to emulate, tried to act like Jesus. And we know Peter at times did very good, and other times not so good. And I'm sure that at each of those times, Jesus was there guiding him, correcting him, affirming him, whatever it might be. So that Peter gradually was being molded and shaped into a Jesus-like person. So much so that in today's gospel, Jesus is saying to Peter, you are the rock on which I will build my church. Jesus was confident enough in Peter that he could make that kind of claim for Peter. And I think the same is true for us. We need to try our best to try and act like Jesus. And there again, in prayer, listen to how maybe God, if it's at the end of the day, affirms us in how we did that. Or maybe God will stir in our heart and say, today you missed an opportunity to be my presence for somebody. Somebody needed a hand to be reached out to. Somebody needed an affirming word, and you just walked by. You were so caught up in yourself, you didn't see them, notice them. So sometimes he'll affirm us and say, way to go, you really reached out well, you shared my love. We'll hear that in our hearts. Other times maybe he'll challenge us. But each time that we do, we get a little bit closer to knowing who Jesus is as we act more and more like him. So as we continue our journey of faith, let us be like Peter. Let us know Jesus by listening, by observing, by questioning, by trying to act like him. And as we do that more and more in that spirit of prayer, then yes, we will get to know him so that we will not be just making some claim out of the blue, but it'll be a claim from conviction, from experience, from truly knowing Jesus, so that we, like Peter, can say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God.